Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Med School Minutes podcast, where we discuss what it takes to attend and successfully complete a medical program. This show is brought to you by St. James School of Medicine. Here is your host, Kaushik Gua.
Thank you very much for joining our podcast of Med School Minutes. I have a very esteemed panel here today between Dr. Baxter, Ms. Wright, and Dr. Zhang. So Dr. Zhang is an alumnus from St. James School of Medicine, and he is currently the chief resident at Arnot Health. And Dr. Baxter is the program director at Arnot Health, and Ms. Lindsey Wright is the program coordinator at Arnot Health. This is a very, very unique podcast because we've never really had the entire selection team for all intents and purposes on the podcast. And we want to shed light to our viewers about what the process is like, what the roles are, and that hopefully that might help you or help our students and our viewers tailor their application accordingly. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our panelists, and I'd also like to start with Dr. Baxter. If you could give us a brief intro to your background and your experience with Arnot Health.
Okay, so I've been in attending since 1990. It was never my intent to get into GME. I just figured I would be a frontline grunt until I dropped or retired, whichever came first. I was in a private group practice in Oswego, New York, first 11 years of my career, and I've been with Arnot ever since. Kind of stumbled into the world of GME in 2015, figured I'd give it a try, never looked back. Had no idea if I would enjoy it or be any good at it. Turns out I enjoy it a lot. Guess the jury's still out of it if I'm any good at it, but as long as I keep enjoying it, it's cool. So
that's excellent. I'm sure we have scores of students and residents and physicians who would probably definitely concur that you're really good at it. So how about you, Ms. Wright?
So I started in the medical field at 18. I had gone to college, had no idea what I wanted to do. So I got a job at a local hospital, and I've been in the medical field ever since. And that was about 15 years ago. I started with Arnot about 5 years ago, and wound up, like Dr. Baxter, joining GME by accident. More so, he stole me. I was the practice manager for the residency clinic, and his coordinator of, I think, 12 years she was there, had resigned. So him and the institutional coordinator thought I would be good for the position, and I accepted, and I've been here ever since.
And we were right. She is perfect for the position. So
that's awesome. How about you, Dr. Zhang?
So I joined Arnot about 2 years and a couple of months ago. Like Kaushik mentioned, St. James alumni. I've been very fortunate to join a wonderful program working directly with Lindsey and Dr. Baxter. In this short career, I think one of the highlights of becoming junior chief and chief resident, really enjoying my job. I think one of the reasons why I joined was to try to lead this program better than I found it. So having the opportunity to kind of lead by example, I think I'm very honored and very blessed to have this opportunity.
Oh, that's excellent. So Dr. Baxter, I'd like to focus on you. You did mention that you were a quote unquote frontline grunt and then you went into GME. I know a lot of our viewers they don't really know the difference from a practice perspective, from a professional perspective. How is being on the front lines different from GME? Does that really affect your day-to-day, so to speak?
yeah, huge. When I was in just frontline primary care, it was basically patient care all the time. Now that I'm in the world of GME, So the first couple of years I was in, I was basically a Monday afternoon preceptor at the residency clinic. And then I was asked to take over as the program director in January of 2015. Since then, my clinical time, I basically have 3 half days a week of clinical, and now the rest is administrative and teaching. So it's been a real paradigm shift for me, which is part of the reason I wasn't sure if I was going to be any good at it, because I had actually had no prior experience in the realm of GME, except being on the receiving end. That was like 3 decades before. So it is pretty huge, because when you're in private practice, it's basically patient care 24/7. Because I'm an old guy, it was inpatient, outpatient hybrid model, which is going by the wayside, but I basically did it all 25 years before I entered the world of GME. So,
okay. And as far as workload is concerned, do you think that the workload is less, more, better, worse, the same,
same but different.
2 sides of the same coin?
Yeah, same but different. Okay. I still do a fair amount of stuff after hours, except instead of charting, it's filling out things on the ACGME, ADS, the website. And there are times when I'll get texts or calls from residents after hours about issues or problems. And, Roland and Lindsey and I have all had our share of after hours convos. So conversations. So, yeah. So, I do have a little bit more freedom of time in a more administrative role. I can kind of plan a little better, because clinical practice, of course, it's kind of built on the tyranny of the urgent. You just never know when somebody really sick might stroll through the door. So,
right. Well, but for what it's worth, I think from and obviously this is a biased approach, because my exposure to most physicians is from the program director side. Obviously, being a part of St. James, the only time I actually see folks who are on the front lines is when I'm sick myself, which is never a very pleasant experience for me. But I think the graduate medical education programs and program directors do a fantastic job of ensuring that the continuity of excellent care. I mean, because, let's face it, I know this is arguable, but the United States does have one of the best medical care practices in the world. Again, arguable, debatable, but that's my opinion, having gone to several countries and seeing healthcare in several different, politically, yes, things could be better, but what you're doing, Dr. Baxter, training the next generation of physicians and making sure that people can go into a hospital and rest assured that the institution is going to do what they can to ensure that the person gets better. That's a huge, huge deal. So, Ms. Wright, I had a question for you. So you obviously worked at a different setup. You weren't dealing with as many students before. How is that experience going from not necessarily dealing with students and residents as much to today? Like, where you're dealing with students, you're dealing with applicants as well, right?
Mm-hmm. So there's days that it gets overwhelming, especially in the beginning, because it seems like everyone comes to the coordinator first, kind of the go-between between them and the program director. So it's nice, though. It's nice seeing the med students evolve, because we have a med school, Lake Erie College of Osteopathic Medicine, right next to us. So we have a lot of med students come in and rotate with us. We get to watch them learn, see them grow.
Okay.
And then they graduate and go on to become doctors. So it's different. Before dealing with staff and patient complaints, it's a little bit nicer. I'm not good with patient complaints. But yeah, it's definitely a different pace, something entirely new. I've always been, when I'm working, I like to work closely with physicians. So I've always just been in that track. So it's not anything too adventurous for me, but I do enjoy it.
Okay, that's awesome. And Dr. Zhang, how about you? Obviously, this is kind of your foray. You came in as a resident, and then now you're a chief resident. How does that change in role really affect you? Does that going from a resident to chief resident, do the responsibilities change dramatically?
I think yes and no. My first more responsibilities to my patients and being a good doctor, still training, making sure that I'm growing as much as I should be. At the same time, I think being chief puts a whole new layer on things. Personally, I think my role, and actually my co-chief, Dr. Andrea, couldn't join us, our role is to make Miss Lindsey and Dr. Baxter life easier. So
Right.
if we can solve the majority issue, at least the minor issue, so they don't have to worry about it, I think whatever we can do to make their lives easier. It's a little bit of a juggling act between trying to learn on my own, be a good physician, as well as dealing with the admin work. But for the most part, I really enjoy what I do. And hopefully, I think I have some excellent feedback. I think as a class, we're doing very well together. So overall, things are going very smoothly.
Right. And I think what you hit the nail on the head, and I think this is a universal truth, that if you are working somewhere, the essence of your job is to make sure that people around you, their lives are easier. And I think that that's a philosophy that can be adopted to just not medicine, just almost anything else. And I think that that's a great philosophy to live by. So, Dr. Baxter, I have a question primarily about the acceptance process. So we've always heard that, there are multiple layers of review and things like that. Would you be able to give us an overview of at Arnot Health, how does the application and the residency selection process work at the high level? And where would, say, you as a program director come in? Where does Dr. Zhang as the chief resident come in? Where does Ms. Wright as the program coordinator come in? And how many other eyes and hands touch the application of each candidate?
Okay, a little bit to unpack there. So the application process usually starts with Eris, and the biggest cog in the machine is definitely Lindsey as the coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
We do have filters in place to try and get through literally thousands of applications that may come in. Because I think we start at 2,000 almost, maybe even a little more than that. And
oh, wow.
Yeah. And by the time we apply some filters, that knocks it down by a bit. But, so once we get filters, and when I say filters, it's we tend to filter out folks who are more than 5 years since they graduated medical school, because that's a long time to BOA,
Got it.
Got to, at least have passed step 1 and 2.
Okay.
And we don't put anything in there, a qualifier on number of attempts.
Okay.
That part doesn't necessarily bother me as much. I've had residents who have had some fails on their steps. I actually have faculty who have had fails on their steps.
Okay.
Just because you're not a good test taker doesn't mean you won't be a good resident.
Right.
I've had some excellent test takers who didn't make it through their intern year, but had board scores that would, light up a marquee. So that doesn't necessarily mean anything either. And to be honest, those are the main filters that we use. I'm not sure if my approach is different than most, but because I was in the front lines for a while, and GME was never my main focus until recently, so I don't know if I approach it differently, but I'm not a super strict guy on academic type things, because I know that there's more than just facts and figures that go into making a good physician. So,
right.
And
so when you,
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please. So I was going to ask, as you mentioned, you have filters. Are these filters something that you come up
Yes.
with, that you could wake up one day and you're like, you know what, I think I want, X score in USMLE Step 2, or I want, I want somebody who likes red. Are these filters arbitrary? Is there a process that goes into coming up with these filters? Are these entirely automated, or do these come from the board of the of Arnot Health? How do you come up with these filters?
Totally arbitrary. Some of them are built into ERIS. Like if there's an ability to do it by score, I don't use it. Like I said, I just want to make sure you've passed it so that we don't hit a speed bump like you match to us, and that's like, oh, you didn't pass Step 2 ever, so now you can't come. That's that's it. And like I said, med school graduation year, those are like the main ones that we use. I honestly don't have a lot of other filters beyond that, because I've had residents who have trained all over the world, USMDs, USDOs, folks from the Caribbean, people who've trained in Poland or China, Pakistan, India. I mean, like literally all over, and they're all awesome. I've been very fortunate, I guess, maybe because I really try to keep it open. By and large, I've had really excellent residents through the years. We're now kicking it as great physicians out in the real world.
Okay. So I have a question for Ms. Wright. So I know you had mentioned that sometimes it gets overwhelming. And I'm sure every person who's applied to the program has at one point or the other emailed you, including Dr. Zhang, I'm assuming. But is there something that you would recommend students to do or applicants to do to not make it overwhelming for you?
So the biggest thing for them to do is on their application, if there's any breaks in their education, if there's anything on their application that they feel needs an explanation, because those are things we're going to look at. If they've had a leave of absence from education, if they had some multiple, fail attempts on their steps, anything that would be a red flag on their application, the more they document and explain about why those things occurred, then that makes it easier for me looking through their application. Sometimes they'll put their application in and then they'll send me an email with the explanation.
Got it.
So if they just have everything centralized in ERIS and explain as detailed as they can, then that makes it easier for me, because then I can say, oh, they had a leave of absence because of a family death or family illness. Not a problem. As long as it wasn't a disciplinary action, then we typically, don't judge that if they had to have a leave for that. So the more they explain on their application, the better. If people do email me, I don't delete them. There's probably some institutions that are like, we'll put them in the spam folder. If people do email me stating, we want to come to your institution, here's my ERIS number, I'm okay with that.
Okay.
I actually create a folder in my email that I put them into. And I do go through them. I do get a lot of emails. Some coordinators do not, but I do actually go through. I probably get thousands of emails during application time, because I want to give everybody a fair chance.
Of course.
And if you're taking the time to email me that you want to be at our institution, then I'm definitely going to look at your application.
Okay.
Even if there's something on it that doesn't pass our filter, because we have students that have matched with us that could be more than 5 years out of med school.
Right.
Because we looked at their application and something just jumped out at us. So definitely the amount of emails can be overwhelming.
Okay.
But if you are interested and you feel that there's something on your application you want us to see, if you email me, I'll more than likely look at your application. Definitely. So,
okay.
But
awesome.
yeah, the more
That's
they
really
explain,
good advice.
Yeah, the more they explain on their ERIS, the better.
Okay. So, Dr. Baxter, going back to you and Dr. Zhang, if you have anything to add, please jump in at any time. But again, as you mentioned, I'm largely going to focus on Ms. Wright and Dr. Baxter. But please feel free to jump in at any time if you have anything to add. But Dr. Baxter, going back to you, you did mention that so the filters are the first step. These seem to be very automatic. I'm assuming that there's something very akin to an Excel filter where you say, I need applicants who pass USMLE and stuff like that. And then you whittle it down.
Yes.
Typically, as you said, you get about 2,000 plus applications on the low end. How your first screening, is there a set number that you and Ms. Wright are looking to get to? If you get 2,000 applications, you're like, okay, I'm going to really dive into 800 applications, or maybe 500, or maybe 100, maybe 50. What's the second stage in the process?
Second stage is where you hone in a little bit more on, say, steps. Like I said, the filter to get through is just to have passed. But if you've had 3 fails on both step 1 and step 2, that gives us a little pause. And that's when we start to look at the transcript a little more. It's like if you fail one class, it's not a biggie. On the other hand, if you've got 4 or 5 each semester, or each year, if you have 4 or 5 each semester, I doubt you'd make it this far anyway. But if you have 4 or 5 in a year, that also gives us some pause. And to be honest, one of the first things I look at are personal statements and letters of recommendation to make sure people are actually interested in family medicine. Because the way the system is set up right now, 1 out of 6 people that I interviewed this past year matched into other specialties, which was really aggravating and to me personally. And, because there was a lot of people out there who legit want to do family medicine, and I want to really try and make sure I find them. So if you have letters of recommendation that are really generic and don't specify a specialty, or that do specify a different specialty, usually those get filtered out. Because I want people who actually want to do family medicine. I don't want to be anybody's escape plan or backup plan. Yeah. So.
And when you hone in on this, so letters of recommendations, how detailed are you looking at the application at that point? Are you reading every line in the application? Are you reading every personal statement at that point? Or are you just skimming through?
They're still skimming. There's still way too many at that point to go line by line.
Okay. And do you think that
I wish I could tell you I was that dedicated, but...
What about Ms. Wright? Are you spending a lot of time with the applications, reading the entire application and the personal statements and stuff like that? Or are you at that time also kind of trying to whittle it down so that you can really focus in on the better applicants?
Yeah, so at that time, still skimming. Probably by the time we set the filters, we're between 800 and 1,000 that the filters break it down to. So then when we go into the applications, I try to filter it in the list so that if they pass step 3, it goes alphabetically. We've filtered by school before. We've filtered by, scores, things like that. Now you can't filter by scores, but typically I will try to go through each one, but I have my certain quick clicks to look. So I'll look at the step, pass, fail, in that line. I'll look to see if they have an explanation about if they had a leave of absence, or if they have multiple fail attempts. We'll look to see generally where they're from, and we'll look to make sure that there's at least letters of recommendations uploaded. At that point, we still haven't looked into the letter of recs, but we want to ensure that they at least have had people recommend them to the program. So those are kind of the hot spots we look at when we get it down to that filter, and then we continue to filter from there.
I see. So that's your second level of review. And then what's the next level of review after that, Dr. Baxter?
Once you get through that, I mean, we do start extending invitations. Again, I don't know how other programs do it. I've only ever known my own way of doing it. But once we start extending invites and arranging interviews, if you've made it to the point where I'm talking to you, at that point, the academics and the scores and all that becomes secondary to me. When I interview people, I start at the hobbies and interests section of ARIS. I want to know what these humans are doing when they're not doctoring, and see if they'd be a good fit, because if you're into all sorts of really fancy ethnic cuisine and Broadway shows and that kind of thing, you're not going to have a whole lot of fun in Elmira. We're out in the middle of the sticks, and I really am just trying to look for personality and fit and just see how well I jive with somebody. And, and basically I have other people that might want to delve in and hammer on the academic portion of it more. I have faculty who do, that's kind of like their jam. They much prefer to do that. I am basically looking for fit as far as like personalities.
Okay.
So far, so
right.
Good.
Okay.
Did that answer your question? Did that answer the question?
No,
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so that means with your first filters, you whittle it down to about 50% of the total application.
Mm-hmm.
And then with your second review, what number are you looking to get to? So how many do you actually invite for an interview? Is it 500, 600, 700 students, or is it much lower?
About 100 and...
Yeah, like 100 between 100. Yeah, 100 to 130. Unfortunately, like with the NRNP, you can't invite more people than you have spots to interview, because that's a big no-no. So what we do is we invite, this would kind of be like the third filter. We invite our 100 to 130, depending on how many spots we determined with our interview committee the month prior. And then depending on the response to those invitations, if people start declining, then we get to our second group of people. Like, we feel these people can be invited. And we do get declines. There's probably 20 extra people I was able to go to the next list to be able to invite them. And some of them became some of our new interns this year. So everything kind of works out as it should. But it is definitely, we kind of have it down to a science, but in the beginning, it looks like an extremely overwhelming process when you have the number of applications just ticking up every day. But we do, Dr. Baxter and I work closely together we sit in my office and we just kind of go through applications. It's like, you take the bottom of the list, I'll start from the top. And do you think this person's good? Do you think this would be good? Do you think they'll want to come here from California? Kind of all those things we kind of take into play.
So it seems like an extremely collaborative process between you, Ms. Wright, and you, Dr. Baxter. It's not essentially that Ms. Wright is screening these and then sending them out to you, but it seems like both of you are doing the screening simultaneously.
To a point. It's actually a little hybrid of what you just mentioned. She does a lot of the early screening.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's be brutally honest. She does more work in this process than I do.
That's awesome. And then, so the big burning question is, how many personal statements do each of you read? Like at an average per year? Like, is it 500, 600? Is it 100? Is it 50? What's a ballpark?
Really read at least a couple hundred. I really will hone in on
100.
Yeah. So,
okay. Right. And that's what the big debate has always been, because every time when I talk to students and I tell them that your personal statement is exceptionally important because this is your introduction to the program director. And they're like, oh yeah, I know, they get thousands of applications. They're not reading mine. And I keep telling them that every program director and program coordinator I've met, they read a couple of hundred at the very least. And most of my students don't believe that. They're like, no,
yeah.
that's not possible.
Okay,
I have
believe it,
cried
guys.
during
He's
personal
right.
statements.
Yes. Yeah, there are some that are heartrending.
Like, I have sobbed reading some of them.
Really?
The nice thing about the personal statement is they need to be entirely true to themselves in their personal statement. It is solely about them. And anyone that has ever gone into medicine in any portion of medicine, whether it's physician, nursing, EMT, anything, there's always one thing that has happened in your life that has caused you to want to help people. So write about that in your personal statement.
Okay.
If there's numerous different things there's always a moment in your life or what you want to do when you become a physician, your training is done. Those are probably the best personal statements I've read. I want to know what caused you to want to be a physician and to go on and help people. That's what I want to see in a personal statement.
Yep. What lights the fire?
Right. Do you think in the personal statement process, is there something as a cliche for you that, oh, so-and-so had this debilitating disease and I knew them and I wanted to fix that? Do you think that there's any such thing as a cliched response to why somebody wanted to be a physician?
I'm mulling that over. I'm trying not to give you a bunch of dead air here. To be honest, most of the cliches I see in the statements are not about being a physician, but more about choosing family medicine. For whatever reason, they always seem to, not always, but a lot of them, if I'm seeing a cliche, it's like, oh, it's just got the broadest scope and you get to do this and do that with the whole person. And it's like, I don't know of any specialty where you're dealing with body parts per se. Every physician deals with the whole person. You know, if what you should be saying is, you know, the social, the family connections, or the fact that you love the variety, or the fact you'd be bored if you were, you know, pigeonholed down into one little aspect, you know, and, you know, those are some of the cliches. But, you know, Lindsey really hit the nail on the head. Let us know what lit the fire in your belly and what you plan to do with that fire once you're done with us. That's really important.
Okay.
So.
Okay. And Ms. Wright, have you seen any, do you think that there are any cliches that when you read this is like, oh my God, not again. No, don't tell me you saved your cat. That's what made you interested in medicine.
Yeah, probably. I would have to agree with what Dr. Baxter said is don't do the I want to be a family physician because. Just don't, write it as if you are just looking to be a physician. It wouldn't think about what being a family physician encompasses instead of stating, I want to be a family physician and this is why. What about family medicine makes you feel that's the best route for you? What about, you know, if you're going into psych, what about psychology makes you think it's the best for you?
So obviously at this point, you're inviting about 100 candidates for interviews. So Dr. Zhang, at what point do you think chief residents, do you think that they even have a role in the acceptance process? Or at what point does it do not just the chief resident, but do other residents have a role? How does that play out in your mind?
So I think, and speaking just for myself, I can't speak for Dr. Achikpam, but I don't view myself any different than an intern, a second year or a third year. I think at the end of the day, I'm still a resident, just trying to be a better doctor than I was yesterday. On that same side, we do have quite a few medical students battling with us. And the residents, even though they're very busy, we do listen. And one question I ask them, especially if they come to my clinic, like, what do you want to do after you graduate? If they want to do psych or surgery, nothing wrong with that. But then if you don't want to show any initiative, if you don't want to be there, then that's completely fine. But then further down the line, if you want to apply to our program, I'll kind of take that into effect too. I also talk to my colleagues and with my intern, second and third years, because we look at the resumes, the personal statements too, and we talk among ourselves. What do you think about this person. I completely agree with Dr. Baxter and Lindsey that personality is probably paramount. We know you can do the work. We know that you passed your education. Can you vibe well with us? Can we spend 80 plus hours a week? Not 80, but can we spend a lot of time together and not want to kill each other at the end of the day?
Right.
I think being able to jive well with the resident team and actually watching how the medical students treat each other, treat people who are not medical. So how they treat other staff, how they treat nurses, janitors, how they interact with other people is something that I look for too. Because when they're not, under spotlight, how do they behave? I think is really important for me.
So this is a question, kind of an open question to all three of you, is of all the candidates that you've seen over the years, what are the biggest red flags? The minute you see that, you're like, oh my God, we're not touching this guy with a 10-foot pole or gal. So, I mean, is there anything like that? Or is it just always, you never know. Is it year to year that changes? Or, are there any major red flags that you would say that, hey, if this happened to you, please just don't talk about it? Or if this is you, try to keep it on the DL.
Yeah, there are definitely red flags. And I mean, probably one of the biggest ones would be if there's like no letters of rec at all, that would be a red flag. One of the other ones would be if it took them a long time to get through medical school and there's no explanation. That's one of the biggest things. So if we see that you've had an extended training and when we go to your transcript, if you failed classes or things like that, and you have not explained why, that's a big red flag. If there is something with your step 2, you haven't passed that and you haven't explained why, if those things show up and they haven't taken the time to explain it, that's the red flag. We go past it. So that's why it's very important to explain those things, because those are probably the 3 biggest red flags would be is, no, we're not even going to waste our time.
Yeah. And so this is one because of the emails that I get. So, and by the way, if anybody out there is listening, if you email me, make sure you CC Lindsey, because I'm not nearly as kind with my deletion policy as she is. So but if you're emailing me, please do not refer to my program as esteemed or distinguished or, because we haven't been around long enough, for one thing. And for another, it's run by me. I'm unimportant and unexciting, and there's nothing prestigious about me. So,
Yeah, that's the one thing that makes us laugh.
Yeah.
It's sort of a STEAM program.
And it's just like, no, stop doing that, because, for all I know, the esteemed prestigious program they're really looking for is at Yale, and I'm just like part of a copy of 10,000. As far as red flags, when we get into the interview phase, the biggest red flag for me is perceived inauthenticity. If you are not authentic with me, one of the biggest ways to lose me is the minute I feel like you're telling me what you think I want to hear, as opposed to what's coming from your heart and soul, I'm out.
Okay.
And
those are all, go ahead.
I understand it can be a nerve-wracking process. So I'll never penalize anybody for showing a little case of nerves. Like I said, the minute I think you're just telling me what you think I want to hear because it sounds good, forget it. I'd rather just hear what comes from your heart and soul and what really lights the fire in your life.
So in the flip side, what's a candidate that as soon as you see their application, they're like, you know what, we need this guy or in this gal. This person has to be in our program. Are there any things like that as soon as you see that on the application, you're like, yep, definitely second round or definitely interview, or something like that. Are there any green flags, so to speak, in an application?
Well, the first green flag would definitely be a step 3 pass.
Okay.
If you got your step 3, our institution just made our step 3 passing policy more stringent. So it's definitely a lot of weight off the student's shoulders as well as our shoulders. If you already have your step 3, you don't have to worry about taking it during rigorous inpatient or night float or ICU, especially when it can be a condition of your employment at some point. So definitely that's a huge green flag. We'll continue to thoroughly review the application if that step 3 passes in there.
Okay.
But admittedly, that's a guarded green flag, though, because chances are, if you've already got step 3, it's because you didn't match the first time around. So if you're trying to get in for the first time and you're a 4th-year student, just the way the system works, you're not going to have a step 3. But, so to me, the green flags are the green flag is lots of letters of rec from family docs that actually say, they really want to go into family medicine. They're very enthusiastic about family medicine. I would want this person to be my family doctor. Those are always good things. The personal statements where they're unequivocal, they really want to do family medicine. Those to me are the green flags. So.
And just to add to that, Kaushik, if you don't mind, I think a reputation is paramount too. So when medical students really passionate about family medicine, went to a bunch of family med conferences, med residents kind of vouch for themselves. I know in our program, one of my good friends, Dr. Cam, some of the residents that he recommended are phenomenal. So having a resident vouch for someone, I think goes a long way too.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Okay.
Didn't think of that one, Roland. It's a good one.
So one other question, this is a burning question, and we're coming up to nearly an hour, and I'm going to wrap this up soon. But this is possibly the last question, unless I don't think I will have any follow-up questions. But how recently Step 1 went from scores to pass-fail. Has that changed your process in any way whatsoever?
It hasn't really, only because we weren't as huge on scores to really begin with, especially because nationally during the pandemic, scores were down for STEP. So the past 2 years, we have taken it to more, okay, there's a passing score, kind of what was their score, but it wasn't anything that, okay, we have to have this base score just because we knew the national averages were down. So I don't think it'll hugely change, but there will probably be, if we're narrowing down candidates, we have 2 perfectly good candidates and we have 1 spot left, that would be kind of the area where we might invite the person with the higher score than we would have the next person. So that would be kind of the only issue I feel it would pose for us. But just like Dr. Baxter said, we're looking into the academic part of it. But the biggest thing is seeing how your personality is and what drives you.
Okay. So it's never really seems like a situation where, you call somebody for an interview and, they sat cross-legged or they were leaning too much. That's why you didn't select them. It seems like these are, at least for as far as your program is concerned, these are all myths. Because I've heard people say that, they sat cross-legged and that's why I didn't get selected.
If they don't select you because you sat cross-legged, you don't want to go there anyway. Quite frankly, yeah. Yeah, it's just, if I'm sure there's some out there. I mean, it takes all types, but no, we really try to be pretty chill. I mean, something that I tell all the residents at interviews, when I go through a general overview is like, we try to be as chill as we possibly can, because no matter how easygoing or how strict a program is, the one thing that all programs have in common is that residency is hard. I mean, it's stressful. You work a lot, you work hard, you will stress out. And, the question is, what kind of support are you going to get along the way? A bunch of people telling you, suck it up, buttercup, or a bunch of other people, or a bunch of people who are saying, hey, how can we help? That's the kind of stuff that matters. We try to be the latter, and actually try to support people. I mean, I never invite anybody to join our program with the intent that they're not going to pass with flying colors at the end.
I have one final question. And I remember when Dr. Zhang was going through the process, we talked about this at length. And that is, there are several services out there that charge thousands and thousands of dollars to prepare residency applications. What I've noticed from these guys is that these guys have a cookie cutter approach. And I can tell once I see the application that they're all the same. And can you tell, if as program coordinators and program directors and even chief resident, can you guys tell that this is an application that was created by somebody else?
Absolutely. As an esteemed, prestigious program director, I can absolutely tell when they've been coached that way.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, cookie cutter is the perfect word.
Okay.
They do. They all look the same. It's the same verbiage, the same phraseologies, and you can tell it's cookie cutter. So save your money, guys. If there's one take-home message I could give the students who are listening to this, at least from the perspective of a program director who's an N of one, just be yourself.
Okay.
End of story. Be yourself.
What about your experience, Miss Wright? Did you, do you have something like that?
With it being cookie cutter?
Yeah. Can you tell that, oh my God, this is written by somebody else, or it's like some sort of an agency?
Well, and I think that part kind of shows in their personal statements too. You can kind of tell when they're taking from something else and just filling in the blanks. You can tell when it's not written by them. So I think, to me, that's the biggest thing that I notice, is you can just tell when a personal statement is just like a draft, a template that they've filled in.
I can definitely vouch for that. I'm not ashamed to say I didn't match first few times. And my personal statement was very much like that, thinking that, okay, here's a medical scenario, here's how I dealt with it, and then blah, blah, blah. The last time when I was fortunate enough to match it on it, I scrapped the whole thing, wrote it from the heart, unpolished. I wouldn't say unpolished, but just really from the heart. I think that's what really helped me stand out a little bit more.
I would agree. The very first question I asked Roland in his interview was a question. Like I said, I normally start with hobbies and interests. My first question for him was something directly from his personal statement. He's one of the only ones I've ever done that with.
I know. I remember Dr. Zhang mentioning that after his interview, and we were very thrilled and impressed, actually. So to sum up, I mean, we had a long conversation, and thank you so much, Dr. Baxter and Ms. Wright, for really finally shedding some light on what this process is, because it seems like this is for most applicants, it's a very esoteric process. They don't really know what goes in. They don't know what the levels are. They don't know what's right and what's wrong. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. So this definitely clears things up. But if there is one advice that you would give a potential applicant to your program, what would that be? Let's start with you, Dr. Baxter.
Like I already said, be yourself. The minute I think you're fake, I'm out. If you want to So be yourself, actually want to do family medicine, and don't make it your backup plan.
Okay.
And, like I said, hopefully you're willing to work hard. But the big thing is be yourself. The best, in my opinion, the best physicians are good humans first. And that's the way I try to interview people, is try to be a good human. So
that's excellent. What about you, Miss Wright?
My advice kind of goes along with his, especially having confidence in yourself. The fact of you've made it through part of the difficult journey already. You went to college, med school, and now you're applying and interviewing to be a resident physician to get through your next step. So own that. Have confidence in yourself. I know a lot of med students will get so shaky and nervous and act like, they haven't done anything incredibly difficult when their 20 to 30 minute interview is just a tiny, easy portion of that. So I think they make it bigger than it needs to be. So just remember what you've already gone through, and the interview process is not harder than that. So definitely try to go in with confidence and try not to be as nervous.
Miss Wright, you should absolutely have a regular podcast inspiring would-be applicants. I'm not kidding. This is such great advice. And it really switches the perspective, because you're right. Everybody thinks, and it is in a certain degree, getting into a program is the most important part. But when you switch the perspective, it doesn't seem like the most important part, because they've already gone through so much. But you should absolutely be a motivational speaker for all would-be residents, for sure.
Well, thank you.
If you want to fly in both to Anguilla, Kaushik, both Dr. Baxter and Anguilla.
Yeah, no, I mean, that definitely. So, Dr. Zhang, any advice for would-be residents?
So I definitely agree with Lindsey and Dr. Baxter. I think one thing that Lindsey mentioned was about the confidence, right? I think one thing all med students should do is kind of network. So given the short pitch, like tell me about yourself in 2 minutes or less, why I stand out in the sea of excellent applicants. I was fortunate to go to the EFB conference with my co-chief 2 months ago. We met dozens, if not maybe a few hundred, almost 100 medical students, listening to their stories, see which ones have practice, which ones are comfortable in their own skin, which ones own up to the resume. And like Dr. Baxter mentioned, they're comfortable with who they are, they know what they want from life, and they're willing to give the time and sacrifice to achieve their goals and ideals. I think that's very paramount as we've seen the fire behind the eyes, like he mentioned too. So when you do it for the first time versus this is my 100th time, they're comfortable with who they are, what they want, and what they need to do to achieve it.
Okay. Wow, awesome. That's excellent. Well, thank you all so much for really shedding some light on a topic that has created a lot of confusion. I wouldn't call it confusion. It's a lot of enigma, so to speak.
Thank you so much for tuning into our show. We hope you enjoyed another episode of Med School Minutes. If you like our content, please follow us and receive notification when a new show is posted. This podcast is brought to you by St. James School of Medicine. For a video version of this podcast, please check us out on sjsm.org/video.